Techaily.ai, your source for technical information. This podcast is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyper-converged and VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, SA365, a turnkey security appliance, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com. Cloud storage in 2025. It's essential for so many of us now, isn't it? But honestly, figuring out what it really costs sometimes feels like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded.
It really does. You look at that price per gigabyte and think, okay, simple enough.
Yeah,
But then the actual bill comes in and it's often,
Yeah.
well, it's more complicated than that.
right.
So today let's try and demystify some of that. We'll break down what's really driving those costs and, give you some practical ways to keep things under control.
Okay, sounds good. So when we talk storage, there are different types in the cloud: block, file, object. You mentioned block is for databases, file for sharing docs, object for big unstructured stuff like videos.
Exactly. And their costs often reflect their purpose.
How so?
Well, think about block storage for databases. It needs to be super fast, really responsive,
High performance.
right? Like dedicated lanes on a highway for data. That kind of performance, it costs more.
Okay.
File storage for things like shared documents is more like your standard road network.
Yeah.
It's efficient, a good balance of speed and cost for everyday use.
Makes sense.
And then object storage that's built for huge scale for data you might not need instantly. Think of a massive warehouse. It's very cost-effective per gigabyte for enormous volumes, but access might be a bit slower.
So the infrastructure and access speed are big parts of the price difference.
Precisely.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive then is to really unpack what goes into those cloud storage bills, the different pricing models, and crucially, how you, our listener, can avoid those nasty cost surprises. Where do we start? What are the main cost drivers?
Well, the first one's pretty straightforward. Storage capacity. How much are you actually storing?
The sheer volume.
Exactly. The more gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes you use, the higher that basic cost. It sounds obvious, but it really underlines why you need to regularly audit what you're keeping.
And have a plan for data lifecycle management.
Definitely. Data tends to grow, doesn't it? So thinking about things like compression or deduplication to get rid of copies can make a real difference over time.
Right. That data sprawl is insidious. Okay, what about keeping the data safe? Durability, I see providers talking about nines. Is that a big cost lever?
Oh, absolutely. Data durability and availability are huge. Those nines, 99.99% durability, they represent how well the system guards against data loss.
So more nines means safer data.
Generally, yes. And to achieve that high level of safety, providers replicate your data. They put copies on different servers, sometimes in different buildings or even regions.
And that replication costs money.
It does. It requires more hardware, more infrastructure, so you need to weigh things up. How critical is this particular data? For your core business functions, that high durability might be non-negotiable.
But maybe not for everything.
Exactly. For, say, older backups or less critical archives, you might be able to choose a slightly less durable and therefore cheaper option. It's all about balancing risk against cost.
Makes sense. Not all data needs the Fort Knox treatment. What about actually using the data? Does accessing it cost extra?
It certainly can. Data access and retrieval patterns are a really significant factor.
How so?
If you're constantly reading or downloading large amounts of data, especially downloading it out of the cloud, you'll likely run into charges for bandwidth and maybe even processing requests.
Like taking luggage out of storage at the airport, there might be a handling fee each time.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. So understanding how often you need different types of data, daily, weekly, maybe only once a year, is really key to managing these access costs.
And that brings us to the dreaded egress fees, right? Moving data out.
Yes. Data transfer and especially egress costs. Everyone needs to watch these. Uploading data, ingesting it, that's often free or very cheap.
But getting it back out.
Getting it back out or moving it between cloud regions or to another provider that can get expensive fast. It's often priced per gigabyte transferred out.
So what can you do about that?
Well, try to process data within the same cloud region where it's stored if possible. Compress data before you download it. See if your provider offers any caching options near your users. And definitely understand the limits of any free tiers or credits related to egress.
Location, location, location. Does the physical location of the data center matter for cost, too?
It does. Geographic location is another factor. Some regions just have higher operating costs, electricity, real estate, regulations.
So storing data in, say, Silicon Valley might cost more than somewhere else.
Potentially, yes.
Oh.
And if you need to move data frequently between different regions, those cross-region transfer fees add up too. Thinking about where your users are can help optimize for both latency and cost.
Okay. And the final piece, security. Does adding security features impact the bill?
Usually, yes. Providers often bundle security features into tiers. Basic security might be included, but more advanced options like specific encryption key management or compliance certifications often come at an extra cost.
Seems like a place you wouldn't want to skimp, though.
Definitely not. Investing in the right security is crucial. A data breach can be far, far more expensive than paying for better security upfront. Think of it as insurance in a way. It can reduce long-term financial risk.
Okay, so quite a few factors feeding into the final price. How do the providers actually structure their pricing then? What are the common models?
You generally see a few main cloud storage pricing models. A common one is subscription pricing.
Like a monthly fee.
Exactly. A fixed fee per month or year for a set amount of storage. It gives you predictable costs, which is good for budgeting.
But you might pay for space you don't use.
That's the potential downside, yes. It works well if your needs are pretty consistent, and you often get discounts for committing longer term, like annually.
Okay, what else?
Then there's pay-as-you-go. This is more flexible. You're charged based purely on what you actually use, how much you store, maybe how much you transfer.
Sounds good if your needs fluctuate.
It is. But it can make budgeting a bit trickier. If you suddenly have a huge spike in usage, your bill could jump unexpectedly.
Right. I've also seen reserved capacity. What's that about?
Reserved capacity is where you commit upfront to using a certain amount of storage for a longer period, maybe 1 or 3 years.
Like buying in bulk.
Sort of. In return for that commitment, the provider gives you a significant discount on the per gigabyte price compared to pay-as-you-go.
So savings, but less flexibility.
Exactly. It's great if you know you'll need that capacity long term. But if your needs decrease, you might still be paying for reserve space you're not using.
Okay. And you mentioned tiers earlier, hot, cold storage. How does that fit in?
Yes. Tiered storage classes. This is super important for optimization. Providers offer different tiers based on how often you access the data.
Hot for frequent access, cold for rare access.
Precisely. Hot storage is the most expensive per gigabyte to store, but typically cheapest and fastest to access. As you move down through cool, cold, and archive tiers, the storage cost drops significantly.
But there's a catch.
The catch is usually that accessing data from those colder tiers takes longer and often costs more per retrieval or per gigabyte retrieved. Smart data lifecycle management, automatically moving data down the tiers as it ages, is key here.
So matching the tier to the access pattern is crucial. When we look at the big players, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, any general differences in how they approach this or common pitfalls?
They all offer tiered storage, but the specifics and naming vary. AWS S3, for example, is known for its granularity. Lots of tiers like standard, intelligent tiering, infrequent access, various glacier options. Pricing can depend not just on storage and retrieval, but even the number of API requests you make.
So powerful but complex to track.
It can be, yes.
I know.
Azure Blob Storage also has tiers premium, hot, cool, cold, archive. One thing people sometimes get caught by with Azure, particularly with cooler tiers, is the egress cost.
You mentioned that earlier.
Right. Retrieval within Azure might seem cheap or free for some tiers, but the bandwidth cost to actually download that data out of Azure is a separate and potentially significant charge. We've heard stories of unexpected bills because of high egress.
Good to know. What about Google Cloud?
Google Cloud Storage has its classes like Standard, Nearline, Coldline, Archive. A key thing with their colder tiers like Coldline and Archive is minimum storage durations. Meaning, if you delete data from those tiers before certain periods, say 90 days for Coldline or 365 days for Archive, you might still be charged as if you'd stored it for the full minimum duration. Or retrieval might have an extra early retrieval fee.
So those tiers are really meant for long-term set-and-forget data.
That's the idea. Accessing it early defeats the cost optimization purpose and can incur penalties.
It really shows at headline prices and everything. What other kinds of hidden costs or fine print should people look out for?
Well, there can be several. Watch out for minimum monthly charges. Some plans might bill you for, say, a minimum of 1 terabyte, even if you only use 100 gigabytes.
Okay.
Also, minimum file sizes. This is subtle. A provider might bill every file as if it's at least, say, 128 kilobytes, even if it's only 2 KOB. If you store millions of tiny files, that rounding up adds up fast.
Wow. Wow, I hadn't thought of that. Anything else?
Minimum data retention periods. This is a big one, especially with some budget providers or specific tiers.
Like the Google Cloud example?
Similar, but sometimes broader. A provider might have a policy, maybe across their whole pay-as-you-go offering, that any data uploaded is billed for a minimum of, say, 30 or 90 days, even if you delete it after one day.
Seriously?
Yes. We saw a case study about Cal Poly Humboldt. They were using Wasabi for backups with a 30-day rotation, but Wasabi had a 90-day minimum retention policy at the time. So they were effectively paying for 3 months worth of storage for every 1 month of backups they kept.
Ouch, that's a surprise bill waiting to happen.
Exactly. They ended up switching to a provider like Backblaze B2, which didn't have that minimum retention period, to avoid those charges. It highlights how crucial reading the entire pricing policy is.
What else is hiding in that fine print?
Look for API access fees. If you're programmatically interacting with your storage a lot, those requests can cost money. Check data encryption costs. Is the encryption level you need included or extra? And costs for specific regulatory compliance features.
So the takeaway is, read everything, assume nothing.
Pretty much, especially around egress limits, free tier expiration dates, and those minimums, retention, file size, monthly spend. Ask yourself, what are they not making obvious?
Okay, this is sobering but really useful. So knowing all these potential pitfalls and cost drivers, what can we actually do to keep costs down? What are the best optimization strategies?
Right, the proactive part. One of the most powerful things is to implement data lifecycle policies.
Yeah.
Set up rules to automatically move data from hot tiers to cool, then cold, then archive as it gets older, and access lists frequently.
Let the system manage the tiers for you.
Exactly. And related to that, use the appropriate storage class from the start. Don't just dump everything into the standard tier by default. Think about access needs up front.
Makes sense. What else?
Regularly review and delete unused data. That digital clutter costs real money. Be disciplined about cleaning out old projects, redundant backups, stuff you just don't need anymore.
Digital spring cleaning, like you said.
Yep. And really leverage archiving and cold storage for that long-term data you're required to keep but rarely touch. The cost savings can be massive compared to hot storage.
Monitoring is probably key too.
Absolutely. Monitor your usage closely and set up budget alerts. Most providers let you set spending limits or get notifications if costs spike. That way, you catch problems early.
Can you negotiate?
If you have significant volume or are willing to commit long-term, definitely try to negotiate discounts. Talk to their sales teams.
Any technical tricks?
Sure. Use data compression and deduplication wherever practical. Reducing the amount of data you store directly reduces cost. Plan your data transfers to minimize expensive egress. And definitely use the cloud cost calculators providers offer.
Play around with scenarios.
Yes, model your expected usage storage amount, access frequency, egress across different providers and tiers to get realistic estimates before you commit.
So it's really about active management, not just picking a provider and forgetting about it. To make this concrete, how might different types of users approach this, like an individual versus a big company?
Good question. For individuals, maybe just backing up photos or personal files, the free tiers on Google Drive, OneDrive, iCloud might be enough. Or if they need more, maybe a simple budget-friendly option like Backblaze B2, where pricing is very transparent, especially if they know roughly how much they'll store.
Okay, and businesses?
For a small business, they might need more capacity and perhaps integration with tools like Microsoft 365, so OneDrive for Business or maybe Azure Files could be good. Again, predictable pricing like Backblaze might appeal, avoiding complexity.
And large enterprises.
Large businesses often have much more complex needs, massive scale, specific compliance requirements, global distribution, maybe machine learning data lakes. They'll likely lean towards AWS S3, Azure Blob, or Google Cloud Storage because of the breadth of features and tiers, even though managing the cost is more complex. They'll heavily rely on lifecycle policies, reserved instances, and detailed monitoring.
So the right answer really depends on the specific needs.
Absolutely. There's no single best or cheapest cloud storage. It's always about understanding your own requirements, data volume, access patterns, durability needs, budget, and then finding the provider and tiering strategy that fits best.
This has been incredibly helpful. It's definitely clear that navigating cloud storage costs in 2025 requires, well, a bit more attention than just looking at the price per gig.
It really does. Hopefully this deep dive gives you, the listener, a much better framework for evaluating your options and implementing strategies to control those costs effectively.
So thinking about how central cloud storage is becoming, for everything from our personal photos to critical business operations, here's something to consider. How will a deeper understanding of its true costs empower you to not just store data, but to strategically manage your digital assets for whatever comes next?
Techaily.ai, your source for technical information. This podcast is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyperconverged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox Cluster, AI servers, SA365, a turnkey security appliance, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com.